Hello, I'm John Lampton, the editor of the Daily Herald and a representative of the Daily Herald editorial board. Today is September 18th, 2020, and welcome to this Daily Herald Shaw Media joint interview with candidates for Illinois Senate District 25 and the two House districts within its boundaries, House District 49 and House District 50. I'm joined by John Solly, editor of Shaw Media Illinois, John Etheridge, editor of the Kendall County Record, and Madhu Krishnamurthy, senior reporter with the Daily Herald. We welcome the candidates, Democrats Karina Villa, Mara Hirschauer, Kate Monteleone, Republicans Janet Ward, Laura Curtis, and Keith Wheeler. We'll vary the rotations of our questions, and Karina Villa, we'll begin our questioning with you. You know, many of the businesses in Illinois have been struggling with the demands from the, particularly the demands from the COVID pandemic. What are things that the state can do to help mitigate the problems for small business in particular in Illinois?
John, thank you so much for the question. I want to first start off by saying that I was actually a school social worker for 15 years before deciding to run, but before that, my parents, I grew up in my parents' grocery store working from the time I was 13 to the time I was 25. So I absolutely value small businesses. And as a state representative, one of the things that was most critical to me was making sure that those small businesses obtained timely, relevant, user-friendly information for applying to grants or loans, and making sure that it was the small businesses that had less than 50 employees that were the ones that were getting the assistance, because those mom and pop shops, those are the backbone of America. They're part of the American dream. And so the state could really make sure that those small businesses under 50 employees had easy to access information and streamlined the process in order to really allow for these small businesses to get the help and assistance that they need. Thank you for the question.
Okay, Jeanette Ward.
Yes, thank you for the question. I believe that the people's legislature should have been called into session to have conversations with the people, with the legislators, especially concerning small businesses. Small businesses should have had a say, and I don't think we should have put undue burdens on them, like fining them for lack of compliance if their folks don't wear a mask. The last thing we need to do is impose penalties on small businesses. I've been endorsed by the National Federation of Independent Businesses because they know who's going to protect business. So the small business community needs to have a say in how the state is run. Thanks for the question.
Okay, we'll go to Laura Curtis, Republican candidate in the 49th House District.
Well, thank you, John. First of all, we need to safely get our businesses back open. There's no recovery without a business being open. So, that's the first step. The second step is we need to reduce burdensome regulation. I'm also a small business owner. I own an appraisal company, and I also have a real estate license. And I'll tell you, as a small business owner in Illinois, we are overregulated and we're overtaxed. And I would like to see the governor and maybe get a task force going to see what type of regulations we need to get our businesses back open, to remove speed bumps from once they do get open, them being able to get back on their feet. We owe that to our small businesses. The second thing I would do is we need to take a look at our tax structure. Now is not the time to enact the fair tax. Barack Obama even said that you don't raise taxes in a recession. And we are in a recession right now in Illinois. So I think, it's three pieces. We got to get these businesses safely opened up. Let people, let's have faith in our small business owners that they know how to safely open up and that they don't want to do harm to their customers, because you want your customers to come back. That's the whole basis of having a business. So we need to get them open. We need to remove speed bumps to their success, including regulation and taxation.
Okay, Mara Hirschauer.
Okay, thanks for the question. As we saw the shutdown happening, I observed what Representative Villa's office was doing to reach out to small businesses. And what they needed most at that time was help and guidance from her office, which she gave. She helped them find masks that allowed them to stay open. And when I'm talking to small business owners in our district, like Karina said, the majority of them are less than 50 employees. And those federal loans from the government, they did not help them from the federal government because the majority of their expenditures was things like rent and things like that, which is where I think we at the state level could help with some funding and some grants for our small businesses, because our economy cannot rebound until we mitigate this pandemic. So we need to make sure that we have funding for PPE and testing and contact tracing. And then our small businesses can get back to what they do best, serving our communities.
Okay. Kate Monteleone.
Thank you for the question, John. I want to stress a point here, and that is we are in a public health crisis. And I think a lot of the issues around small businesses have, there have been attempts made to address their need at both the federal and state level. I have been particularly frustrated in Kane County, where some of that relief intended for small businesses to keep Main Street thriving has been blocked and stalled by county administration. So that's a problem. Getting the resources to the people who need it and need it quickly is the best way to go. I do not believe that a legislative process is the way to address a public health emergency. All of this needed swift action, not committee processes. So that's where we really need to go. I also feel a great deal of empathy for the Main Street type businesses that were excluded from the PPP program because they operate on a cash basis and were unable to access through the SBA some of those benefits. While other companies that are well capitalized and probably did not need that resource for their survival, as the small mom and pops did, were able to take the benefit. So ensuring that the help gets to those who need it most is a priority. Thank you.
Okay. Representative Wheeler.
Good morning. Thanks so much for the question. This is one of the most important topics for me, period. This is one of the reasons why I ran for office in the very first place just a few years ago. Small business in Illinois is the backbone of where we begin to grow an economy that creates jobs and supports families. If you rewind just a few months ago to the middle of the pandemic, as a member of JCAR, the Joint Committee on Administrative Rules, we were right in the middle of a huge outcry from small business across the entire state regarding a rule, an emergency rule actually, that the governor's office moved through DPH that would potentially fine, even jail some small business owners if they did not follow the mandates that were involved in some of the governor's executive orders. I pushed back very hard on that and reached across the aisle, collaborated with some of my Democrat members on JCAR to present a more unified front that the governor needs to rethink this process. There's a better way to go about doing this. We got that actually done. It took several hours in the middle of the JCAR meeting itself to do it. But what it meant was to small business owners across the state was your voice was heard. And there's a more collaborative approach that delivered a better rule, which actually happened in August. It wasn't a perfect rule, but it was a better approach that is going to keep small business owners from being prosecuted and actually incarcerated, which none of us really wanted to see that happen. I don't think the governor really wanted to see that happen in the original rule that was put forth. But this goes to a bigger problem. I mean, small business in Illinois is struggling before the pandemic began. We pay the highest property taxes in the Midwest, among the highest property taxes in the country. Every small business pays that. We have high work comp costs. They're getting better, but they're not great. And we're looking at and right in the face of an income tax increase that could affect many small business owners. So we need to send a better message to small business in this state that we want to support them, encourage them, and give them an environment where they can grow, they can be successful, and then hire our neighbors that are struggling out of luck right now, and put them, back in a situation where they can support their families.
Thank you. For the next question, we'll go in reverse order, trying to give everybody fair time to go first here. So, Keith Wheeler, we will start with you. What is the most important issue to the people who live in your district?
Property taxes. I could stop talking right after that, and that would be adequate, really. Property taxes have been the biggest issue since I've been in office. I hear about them every single day. Lately, we've heard a lot more about corruption ever since the issue with the deferred prosecution agreement with ComEd came to light just a few weeks ago. That has become a centerpiece as well. And some people are tying those two together, that we need to clean out our processes in Springfield, make it so that people have more faith in the government that they have, that represents them in the State House, the State Senate, and the governor's office, and all across our entire political spectrum, in order to move forward into this place where we can actually start looking at how we reform our state finances, how we look at things that matter to ultimately lower property taxes, like pension reform. This is a critical issue. Education reform is a part of that. I know I was very supportive in the past of reforming the funding formula for the state, so we'd have more local money coming from the state to lower property taxes going forward. So property taxes is kind of the centerpiece of almost everything we talk about. It also directly affects job creation because, again, every business has to pay those property taxes. And they're not like they go down because you didn't have a good year. They're the same whether you have a good year or not a good year as a business owner. So property taxes is number one.
Thank you. Kate Monteleone.
Property taxes is a very important issue. And homeowners and businesses in the district need and deserve relief. People across the state need relief from high property taxes. I believe that the pathway to reduce property taxes is through the adoption of the fair tax and the change from a flat tax arrangement to a graduated tax. Illinois is projected to have in excess of a $6 billion added deficit as a result of COVID. The fair tax, if adopted as stated in the spring, should generate about $3 billion. That would be 2 budget cycles of revenue to address the added COVID expenses. And that is an assumption that there's no support from the federal government, that we have to carry the entire weight of the COVID experience on our own. In Illinois, the Tax Foundation has reported that 73% of pass-through businesses, that's S Corps and LLCs, have an AGI of under $200,000 a year. That means 73% of those small businesses would fall into the 97% of people who will be better off with the adoption of the fair tax. So yes, property tax relief is essential. The way to get there is through the fair tax, which will, over a period of time, add more resources to improve school funding so the state can fulfill its responsibility of being the primary source of financing for public schools.
All right, thank you. Laura Curtis.
Sure. I think it's going to be a consensus at this point that the number one issue is property taxes. We've got the second highest taxes in the nation. That said, when you take a look at what drives our property taxes, I know for me personally, I think it's 67% of my tax bill is from the school district. And one of the things that we need to do is, first of all, the state needs to step up and pay its fair share of funding for the schools. It's not fair to our homeowners that that so much of the funding for the schools is on the backs of homeowners, many of whom are elderly and don't even have children in the system right now. So, so that's one of the things that I'd like to see happen, is the state pay its fair share. And secondly, we need real pension reform. You know, I don't agree with changing the Constitution to allow for a fair tax. I think, yes, a constitutional amendment is needed, but I think the amendment we need is for pension reform, real pension reform, because pensions, bloated pensions, we've got the worst funded pension system in the country. That also is contributing to our overinflated property taxes. And the third thing I'd like to mention also is, you know, look at the local units of government we have in Illinois. We have 7,000 local units of government. That is directly contributing to our overinflated property taxes. We need to take a look line item by line item and get rid of redundancies, because the less units of government we have, the less opportunity for corruption, the less opportunity for pensions and the need for pension reform. And it's going to benefit our taxpayers and our residents. And hopefully, you know, I mean, we've got a huge out-migration problem right now. And if we don't seriously address this, we don't need more money, we need more discipline. If we don't seriously address this, we're not going to have enough people to pay our outstanding liabilities as it is. And to say that our $6 billion deficit is going to be solved in 2 years of an increase with the fair tax, well, you're not assuming that we're going to be spending the same amount of money. What if something else happens? What if we have another pandemic or something else? I mean, that's an assumption that I'm not willing to take a gamble on, because if that was true, remember 2011, the temporary tax, when they doubled our income tax? Remember 2017? Springfield's already proven that they can't be trusted with more money. So we need more discipline.
Thank you. Maura Hirschauer.
So I'm listening to all of these points about our property tax, broken property tax system. And yes, the specter of property tax hovers over every conversation I have with voters. But also in my head, I'm replaying the hundreds of conversations I have had. And right now in our district, people are struggling, yes, with our unfair and broken tax system, but also with children who are remote learning, parents who do not have access to affordable, safe childcare, so they're not able to get back to work. We are in the midst of a global pandemic, and we must address these needs. We must address, you know, testing and contact tracing so our schools can safely open. It's you know, our teachers are not babysitters. They should not be the front lines of defense against this COVID-19 epidemic, but our public school system is a huge part of our economy. It's how parents are allowed to, can get back to work and contribute. So the conversations I'm having with voters are really personal conversations, and they're conversations about how we can move forward safely in this pandemic and move our economy forward by taking care of our health first. So while I agree with you know, the specter of property tax and how we need to fix it with hopefully a graduated tax amendment, I'd say our focus right now needs to be on helping people through this pandemic.
Okay, thank you. Jeanette Ward.
I have to unmute myself. Yeah, what I hear a lot, in addition to taxes, when I'm talking with voters, is that they're very concerned about crime and the perception, at least, that there's one particular group of politicians who seem to want to defund instead of defend the police. Defunding the police doesn't help any minority community, doesn't help any community. And the voters that I talk to are very, very concerned about that. And in addition to the taxes, which is a big one, is corruption. And corruption is really a stealth tax. You know, in light of the ComEd revelation, where they agreed to pay a $200 million fine for bribing public official A, who is the Speaker of the House of Representatives, ethics reform is sorely needed. That costs the taxpayer in higher electric rates and no-show jobs for Democrat Party workers, and that's really unfair. My opponent took $1.4 million in campaign contributions from Michael Madigan, and again, he's the one who's involved who's public official A, who's named there, but she hasn't called for his resignation, and she says she's not prepared to talk about it. So in addition to taxes, which is a big one, we need to defend the police and not defund them, and that corruption needs to be addressed. Now, a word about taxes. The people of Illinois Senate District 25 do not support raising their taxes, and most of them understand that a vote yes on the so-called fair tax will raise their taxes. They don't believe the 97% inaccuracy that is being touted, and they understand that it will indeed raise their taxes because it gives the legislature a blank check to raise taxes on everyone. There's nothing in that amendment that keeps it to the so-called higher income earners. So thanks for the question.
Okay, thank you. Karina Villa.
So I think that this question is so relevant because those of us who have been talking to constituents on a daily basis will tell you that the cost of living in the state of Illinois for working and middle-class families is the #1 issue in the 25th district. And that has a lot of layers to it, right? So some of that could be the cost of healthcare, the cost of medication, lack of low-income housing, property taxes. All of these things put together are what are impacting the people that I'm speaking to on a regular basis. Now, when you look at what the state had done previously in regards to funding our schools, everyone was getting the same amount per student. So even if your community had houses $500,000 and above, their property taxes were then able to afford much more for their students compared to communities where the properties are maybe 200,000 and below. And yet the state was still giving the same amount to both of those school districts. I worked in West Chicago District 33 for 10 years, and then I was on the school board of the school district. West Chicago is one of the poorest school districts in all of DuPage County. We did all that we could with what we had. I paid my property taxes year after year, seeing them increase, and understanding that the money had to go to the schools. Now, after I left West Chicago, I went to go work for the Special Education Cooperative of DuPage County. And through that, I was a behavior specialist and was going around to many different school districts. And I saw what a difference property taxes from poorer school districts compared to middle and high income school districts, what a difference that makes. So I was very appreciative of those who had passed the equitable funding formula in our state, because that means that we, the poorer school districts, are going to start making, getting more money per student. So the urgent matter here is that we have to start making sure that we're putting as much money as possible into that funding formula that's equitable now. But then there's a second part of that. It is common practice in the state of Illinois for all of the school districts, year after year after year after year, to levy to the highest amount, even if they are fully funded, even if they have plenty of money in the bank. And those property tax, the property owners then are in charge of raising their money raising the amount of taxes that they're paying year after year after year. So I think that fully funded school districts have to take a hard look at what's happening in their communities and make the determination themselves with that school board whether or not they're going to continue to levy at the highest amount. And that is something that's not within our control. What is within our control is making sure that those lower income school districts like U46, like West Chicago, that those school districts are getting the funding that they need. So eventually, hopefully, those of us who are taxpayers in those areas, once those schools are fully funded, can say to our school boards, we can't continue to have these levies at the highest amount year after year. In terms of pension consolidation, we worked on a bill, a bipartisan bill this last year, that people had been working on for over 40 years. The freshman class, this last session, decided we were going to go to Springfield and we were going to get things done. So that police and fire pension reform bill, we went down, we said, this is a brilliant idea. It's something that needs to happen. And so it happened. And those are the kinds of ideas that we need to move forward with, and not just continue to think that we're gonna, wait for someone else to take care of the problem. We need to actually find solutions for our constituents.
I'm going to follow up on the graduated income tax. Several of you had commented on it. And, in the group we have here, Democrats are supporting it. Republicans are opposing it. If I'm wrong about any of that, please clarify when we get to you. We're going to start with Maura Hirschauer with this. And I've got a couple of devil's advocate questions. The criticism that opponents to the referendum raise is that you can't trust Springfield for the money, that there are no controls. The response that proponents are, well, there are no controls right now. Some would argue that, well, it's just going to be a lot easier when you can pick and choose who to raise taxes on. Would you pledge not to raise, for the Democrats, would you pledge not to raise taxes, if this passed, not to raise taxes beyond the rate structure that's been set out with the referendum? And also, critics will say, well, the problem Illinois has the problem Illinois has is a spending problem, and in particular, and why is it so easy to put a tax referendum, a constitutional amendment for a tax referendum, but not one for pensions? And I guess I would ask for a response to that. To the Republicans, I would ask, what's wrong with people with more money, paying shouldering a greater share of the tax burden? So we'll start with Mara.
Okay. All right. So I think it straight to the heart of the matter when you're speaking about trust in Springfield. And when I'm talking to voters and we're talking about the fair tax, the pros and the cons at the door, because the beauty of this is that it is on their ballot. It is up to the voters whether they want to change our tax system or not. So we're talking about it at the doors and on the phones. And after decades of corruption and mistrust in Springfield, they are unsure they want to change our Constitution right now. That is why every day I'm there building trust. I live in this community, I'm raising a family in this community, and I pay taxes in this community too. So, we should not balance the budget on the backs of the middle class. So I am working to build trust and transparency and accountability within my district so that when I do go down to Springfield, they will trust that, it is not, I do not want to raise taxes on the middle class. So that said, Illinois has one of the most regressive tax systems in the United States when you're taking into account state and local taxes. And it drives income inequality in our state. Our working and middle class families are paying a much larger proportion of their income to state and local taxes. And therefore, they are unable to break free of this burden. And it is an unfair, inequitable system. And if the poorest 20% in our state are paying 14% of their income in taxes, and the cost of living here with healthcare, with simple thing like the cost of a gallon of milk, it's hard for families to make it work. And I believe a graduated income tax will put that relief on the middle class. And then there was a question about pension.
Yes.
Right? Okay. Pension reform is critical, and it is something that, again, the heart of that issue of pension reform is mistrust in Springfield. Decades of mismanagement of our pensions, and I think what we need is some open-minded smart leaders to get down in Springfield and to get everyone at the table. This can be a bipartisan issue. We need real ideas, you know, like the consolidation of the police and fire pensions. And we need to really get down to business and put our partisan politics aside, because this affects everyone, no matter, you know, what side of the aisle you are on.
Right. Thank you. Laura Curtis?
You know, I always, when I hear the word fair tax, I want to laugh, because what we have right now is a fair tax. The definition of fair means equality. Everybody pays the same. I do take issue with it being marketed as a fair tax, because it's not a fair tax. It's a progressive tax. So right now, what we have, the way our Constitution is structured, everybody pays the same rate, which means politicians can't pick and choose which constituency they want to raise money on. Right now, we're going to be opening up a Pandora's box if we allow this to happen. Even the Illinois Policy Institute says that, you know, this is just opening the way. You know, suddenly thousands and millions of Illinois residents are going to wake up and find out that now they are suddenly rich, because the sliding scale is now going to be affecting more and more of the middle class. So I think right now what we have is the best protection in the state of Illinois, because A, it's protecting everybody by everybody having the same amount of skin in the game. Politicians can't pick and choose which constituency they're going to raise taxes on. And even Michael Frericks, our treasurer, said that if we allow the fair tax, it is opening the door to taxing retirement income. I'll say that again. It is opening the door to taxing retirement income. If that happens, you know, we already have a problem without migration. That is going to exacerbate that problem. So right now, I think, look at Connecticut. Connecticut was, I think, the last state to enact a progressive tax. And what did they see? They saw that scale keep dipping down and down and down into lower income brackets, until suddenly, you know, somebody like me or some of the other candidates here, we're going to wake up and find out suddenly that we've become rich. So again, we don't need this constitutional amendment to take more money from our taxpayers. We need an amendment for pension reform, which is going to save our taxpayers money, which is going to help with out-migration, and which is going to truly give more equity to our residents.
Okay, we'll go to Jeanette Ward next.
Yeah, thank you. We can't trust Karina Villa and the supermajority of Democrats in Springfield, because they gave us the unbalanced budgets, higher taxes, and woefully unfunded pensions to begin with. I agree. Even that Democrat treasurer said that it would open the door to taxing retirement income. And if we're talking about income earners earning above a certain amount, that is small business owners. There is nothing making small business owners stay here. You raise taxes on those folks, they're going to leave. And that's going to contribute to our largest out-migration rate that Illinois has, will make it even worse. So there is nothing, again, in that unfair tax amendment question on the ballot that limits them from opening it up to any part of the constituency. It gives them a blank check to raise taxes on everyone, and people will leave. So I'm very much against it.
Okay. Karina Villa.
So let's just start with the conversation about the spending problem in the budget. So really what compelled me initially to run for office was that I worked under the previous administration. I worked under Rauner and the times of not having a budget. And I saw those last 3 years, slowly, the impact start to happen to my families that I worked with. Families who needed desperate help, mental health services for their students, families who were in a crisis and needed access to services, whether it was medical services or housing services or even DCFS. All of us on this call would agree that DCFS is critical to the safety of the children of Illinois. When there is a report, when someone, a professional, calls and makes a report for a child of allegations of abuse or neglect, that there should be someone coming to check in on that child. And I, as a school social worker, would make phone calls during the last administration, the Republican administration that did not have a budget, and services were slashed, which then led to my phone calls being received with, there's 300 calls ahead of you. With, in the past, when there would be a 24-hour turnaround time for a response to calls, it would be 3 or 4 days before I heard from anybody. That is what happens when you don't have a budget. That is what happens when you don't value human life, when you don't value the needs of our children. And so when we talk about there's a spending problem, if you think spending on protecting our children is a problem, well, I just don't think you should be running for office. So when it comes to the fair tax, your question was, do I pledge not to change that structure? I believe that that structure is a fair structure, and I believe that it is the right way to go. So you asked us to pledge that we would not change that structure. And yes, I do pledge that if the fair tax were to pass, that I would not change that structure.
Okay. We'll go to Kate Monteleone next.
Thank you. Okay, so the fair tax, the flat tax in Illinois that everyone pays the same is a very regressive tax because people of middle and lower income pay a higher share of their total income toward the overall tax burden. When added to the taxes for fees, property, sales tax, all of the taxes, which are all very high in the state, their share, the situation of their being overburdened is even worse. So yes, for that reason, I believe that transitioning to a graduated tax, like most other states in the country, is the right way to go. And also the federal government, by the way, has a graduated model. It works. The programs that are funded through income tax in the state include social services, healthcare, law enforcement, and education. The services that drive communities that everybody relies upon. And over the last 20 years, real spending in terms of actual dollars going into those programs has actually declined, not increased. I would argue that when people say we have a spending problem, what we really have is a debt problem. And that goes to the root of the pension question. Pensions were put on a deferred payment plan going back to the Jim Edgar administration when they created the Edgar ramp that would amortize the cost of pension liability over a 50-year horizon, and then failed to pay it for about 20 years. So we got upside down with the liability. It's not because we have pensions, it's because we were bad stewards at the state level and failed in our responsibilities. Just as Karina highlighted, in the Rauner years of no budget, we were failing our responsible obligations to the communities that we serve. So yes, the progressive tax is a way to get on a path to generate increased revenue for this 4 bucket areas that I highlighted of social programming, and which happen to be the same areas that are getting the most adverse impacts from COVID, with higher costs for law enforcement, for emergency workers, for healthcare, for education. So I do support the fair tax. I would pledge to uphold the plan that has been adopted if the amendment passes. I don't know the life of that plan. Is it 2 years, 4 years, 6 years? That I can't predict. But definitely in the life of a single term, I would pledge to uphold that. I would like to also say another thing about pension reform. Again, going back to my comment about it being an issue of debt, I want everybody to realize that there's already been pension reform. People who became employed in the state after 2010 entered with a totally different pension package than everyone else. Their COLA is not 3% across the board. It is not compounded. They have to have more hours or more years of service in order to retire with full benefits. There have been a lot of changes. We have a responsibility to pay our bills, and the better way to do that is probably to look at a re-amortization schedule on the overall pension liability that is outstanding. And doing that would require actuarial review, because Illinois has a bad track record of pulling ideas out of their pocket and not going through all of the hard analytical exercises to ensure that they're deliverable.
Okay, Keith Wheeler.
Got to unmute. Sorry about that. So let's talk to the heart of one of the proponents' advocate, or their arguments is that lower and middle income families pay a disproportionately high tax rate now, and that has to do with property taxes. And we aren't reforming property taxes anywhere in this amendment or in the rate structure that's been adopted to follow this amendment if it were to pass. So realistically, the people that are at the lower end of the income scale right now aren't going to see any real impact if we pass this, because what we've heard so far today is that we're going to spend this money to fill a budget hole. We're also going to spend the same amount of money to fix our pension system. And we're also going to spend the same amount of money, this income that's coming in, the additional money that's coming from the state, to fix education. Well, we can't spend the same money 3 times. So realistically, we have to pick and choose what's going to happen. There's nothing in this tax structure that there's been passed. There's nothing in the constitutional amendment that directs that money to a specific location. So we don't have a path forward that would actually give trust, earn some trust from the voters of Illinois to say, yes, if you back this program, you're going to get this particular benefit instead. And that doesn't exist. It's full flexibility on the spending side for the legislature and the governor in Illinois, and it's full flexibility for the revenue side. I asked on the House floor when both these measures were up in front of us, I said, what are we doing to protect taxpayers here? Is there any kind of a ratio that says that the highest rate can't be X factor larger than the lowest rate? So we don't have this huge, we're going to take 100% of somebody's income and 0% of someone else's. I asked the question, is there any protection in this measure that will say that even a higher income has to pay a higher rate? That's not in here. We've seen issues in other states that have done aggressive taxation at the high end, like New Jersey, have to almost call a special session because one person chose to leave the state. And they take that much income with, and at that higher percentage, it's that much income to the state, then we are vulnerable to those situations. We put nothing in place in either of these measures in the legislature to actually try and protect the taxpayers and the taxpayer system as it is.
Okay, thank you very much. We, Jeanette had brought up the whole issue of defunding police related to a crime as well. And of course, also wrapped into that is the whole social justice issue, reforming police. Would like to ask you, what are your positions on, what's the state's role in in all of this. And we would start with Jeanette Ward. You're muted right now, Jeanette.
Thank you. Sorry about that.
I say some of my best things when I'm on mute. So.
Well, again, I would emphasize that the police don't need to be defunded. They need to be defended, especially in minority communities, because when you take away the funding for police in minority communities, which is what tends to happen, the problems in those communities get worse. So that doesn't help anybody. Our democratic society is uniquely able to confront prejudice and weed out discrimination and promote equality. That's one of the best things about America. So while racism still exists in the heart of some, I think that systemic racism doesn't pervade our institutions. And as a senator, I will be deeply committed to bring both law enforcement and communities of all colors to the same table to build trust, understanding, and strong lines of communication. I think that we need to reject the language of division that has torn our country and our communities apart, and we should instead focus on the goal of living together in peace.
Karina.
Thank you for the question. I have a mental health advisory committee that's made up of numerous people that work in the mental health field, as well as constituents. And we meet on a regular basis through my office, through my state office. And one of those people is actually a police officer. And one of the things that he brings up time and again is the fact that there needs to be more mental health funding, because he can't do the job of social worker and police officer. And more he is having to do that social mental health type of work. And he sees the stress on the individuals, on the community, on the families. So that's why he is part of my mental health committee, why he comes every single time we have a meeting. We just had one last night, and we talked about this at length, about how police officers' jobs are changing so much, and the need for real mental health opportunities for the community. And the other part that I will mention that I strongly believe is that we need to provide opportunities that are accessible to students in high school. In the 49th State House District, we have over 350 manufacturers. Before COVID, I was going and touring these manufacturing companies, and I was meeting amazing people doing amazing work, who were doing so much in the community. And every time they would say to me, Karina, we need workers. We need workers. Please help us. Send us people. We need employees. We don't have enough employees. Please, please, please help us. And it was this common conversation. So I started to just dig a little bit more and ask them about what they needed or what they thought would be the solution to bring more people to their workforce. And they told me, junior and senior year in high school, we need to expand the opportunities for students to be able to go into the trades, to be able to come out of high school with a certificate that would then allow them to go right to work. And, you know, therefore then gaining access to quality pay, quality jobs, good pay, great benefits. And I really think that that's something that our state needs to reassess and really look at, because when you have communities that are disinvested and their education systems are right, we already talked about that earlier, that some of these communities are spending so little on their schooling education per child because of that historic inequitable funding formula that had occurred. I think we need to make sure that we are providing different opportunities. Not all students are going to go to college, because not all of them have the ability, not all of them have the resources, and not all of them want to. So providing in junior and senior year, providing in our high schools opportunities for students to graduate with a certificate, I really think will help change the trajectory of what we've been seeing in these disinvested communities. So thank you for that question.
Okay, we'll go to Kate Monteleone. You're muted, Kate.
Better?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I also do not support defunding the police. I think there are many things that we could do in the way of reform, including a de-escalation, training and de-escalation, improving recruitment, screening, and training programs for police. I think that these folks are under tremendous levels of stress and need additional supports from social work and mental health professionals as part of the team. However, we do have an issue with systemic racism. We do need to tackle the root cause of that. Is it because of implicit bias? Is it a flaw in how we recruit police officers, that we're not getting people who can overcome their own prejudices? These things need to be understood and addressed, but all of it together is going to require more resources, not fewer resources. So for that reason, I absolutely do not support a defunding strategy, and would be looking for more support to provide more effective policing in our communities. Thank you.
Thank you. Keith Wheeler.
I think this is a very important question, and one that I really hope leads us to a bipartisan conversation in Springfield. I know that I've had a lot of discussions with colleagues across the spectrum, across the state, and you asked about the role that the Springfield or Illinois state government will play in this. And I think the things we've already been doing over the last few years in my tenure in Springfield, there's been a very important and powerful emphasis on criminal justice reform. And if you'd asked me when I was walking in the door the first time to be a member of the Illinois House, where I would land on a lot of these issues, I can't think of very many of these reforms that once presented, explained, and then examined fully didn't make sense. And I think I voted for almost all of them. And I intend to be an active participant in what we do going forward, whether we're talking about further accountability, some form of licensure, body cams, all those parts of what could be a solution in Illinois to our first steps. Those are things that I think are on the table. I think we could have something to discuss possibly in veto session if that actually comes to fruition. But I know that this is a bipartisan issue where I don't think that there are that many obstacles to having the right kind of discussion about what do we do to support our law enforcement who are on the front lines of a lot of these issues. Mental health has been brought up many times. I'm an advocate for the fact that police officer mental health is also a very important component of what we need to have in the line of legislation that could happen following this. And the way that we treat mental health in a situation, in all the calls that the law enforcement gets to attend to, they've reached out to me and said, we could use some different approaches on this. We might need some help, some reforms, possibly funding on what would make a difference for their in-person addressing of an issue that they get called to. They get called to things that they have no idea what they're walking into. And the solution might be better served by a mental health or social work perspective rather than just a straight law enforcement. For most of our law enforcement officers, they've not been trained for all of those kinds of things. So I look forward to the discussion. I think it's an important one for us to have in Springfield. I hope we have it soon.
Okay. All right, we'll go to Laura Curtis.
Thank you. I think we're on a slippery slope by saying that there's systemic racism within our police force. The police are not something that we take a look at a state level. It's more of a municipal level. And I've been on my village board in North Aurora since 2011, and we pride ourselves in having diversity on our force. And to say that there's systemic racism when there is an abundance of diversity on most police forces. You know, I mean, it's like we're saying that everybody is a racist, and I just don't see that, not within my village and not within police in general. I mean, what other job is there where your job is to run into danger and possibly save somebody else's life? And speaking of mental health, I'm glad Keith brought it up, because our police, we need to be aware of our police mental health, because when your job is day to day to day, putting your life at risk, and then the thanks they get is to be, you know, attacked and defunded and being accused of systemic racism, to me, that's just not fair. You know, we've got people in these jobs in high risk communities that are doing the best they could do with the resources we give them. I think one of the things the state can do, as opposed to, you know, the municipal level, is we need to encourage people to build and maintain strong families. Strong families are the building blocks of our community. And if we can do something at the state level to encourage families to remain intact and to, you know, raise healthy children that are going to respect law enforcement and that are going to, you know, be good, productive citizens. I mean, I think that that is going to alleviate any stress the police are having, because now there's going to be less need for them. But do I think there's systemic racism? No, I don't, because I'm very proud of the state of Illinois. I'm very proud of how diverse our state is, and I think our police are a reflection of that. Can we always get better? Yes. I mean, I tell our police chief all the time, you know, what are we doing? Are we updating our policies? Are we taking a look at things? Are our tactics reflective of what we need in our community? And to say at the state level we could fix this with a broad brush, I don't think so. I'd rather give that back to the local municipalities. But we need to support our police. We need to defend them. We need to give them everything they need, and we need to stop calling them racist, because that's not the reality of the situation in my perspective.
Okay, Maura Hirschauer.
I just have to take a moment to address systemic racism. It's a system that is put forth that operates in a way that holds people back, that is unfair, and we are not calling individual police officers racist. We are all operating within a system in our country. Democracy has not solved racism. And I think the Black men and women who are dying disproportionately across our country would agree. I liked what I was hearing about bipartisanship and us coming together, because we're in crisis. Racism is a public health crisis right now that's happening in our cities. It's a gun violence public health crisis that is happening across our state and our country. And we need fundamental changes to our criminal justice system, starting with policing and moving towards the court system. You know, in Kane County, I don't want to say numbers because I'm not sure I have them completely correct, but Black people are disproportionately represented in our Kane County jail compared to how many Black men and women are in Kane County. That's systemic racism. And that is something we need to address. I think at the state level, we can pursue issues of criminal justice, issues of body cameras, issues of police accountability. I am by no means pointing fingers at any individual police officer. That is an amazingly important and heroic job. But I am saying we need to take our personal feelings out of it and acknowledge that there is a problem in this country that is holding people back. And I think we can work together to enact anti-racist policies in housing, in education, in healthcare, and invest in our communities. Community-based violence programs, anti-violence programs that are coming from stakeholders within that community will go a lot further, I think, than some of the things we have in place with our policing programs. So I think an investment in community-based services is incredibly important, and rethinking our criminal justice system is critical.
Okay, we're about out of time. We wanted to give you, so we need to wrap up. We wanted to give you each about 1 minute. I'll try to keep it tight to just make the case for why the voters should vote for you over your opponent. We began in this 25th Senate District with Karina V at the start of this. So to end, we will begin with Jeanette Ward in the Senate 25th District. And you got about a minute. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I'm Jeanette Ward, and I'm running to protect freedom, faith, and family. It's hard to have freedom in Illinois when taxes and corruption are crushing our residents. In light of the ComEd bribery scandal, ethics reform is beyond overdue. My opponent refused to answer the question, calling for his resignation. That is Madigan, saying that she's not prepared to talk about it, even though she received $1.4 million in campaign contributions from him and committees controlled by him. Illinois governor has been hostile to faith communities in Illinois, closing churches while abortion clinics, marijuana dispensaries were allowed to remain open. I will defend the faith community in Illinois, and our families are being crushed by taxes. We need to reduce taxes and promote a culture of life. I do value human life, and that is why I don't support the most radical abortion law in America that was co-sponsored by my opponent, and neither do the people of Senate District 25, and they made taxpayers pay for it, and again, she was a co-sponsor. Finally, protecting families means defending and not defunding the police. So I'm Jeanette Ward, running to protect and defend freedom, faith, and family.
Okay. Karina Villa.
Thank you. As a school social worker, I worked tirelessly with families for 15 years. I know what the community has been struggling with. I know the personal stories of the 25th district that people have shared with me. In those moments of rawness and openness from the community, they have told me that they are looking for a reasonable person who's going to reach across the aisle, who's going to do the hard work in Springfield, who's going to represent them, and who already has a proven track record of all of these things. Numerous times in Springfield, I reached across the aisle. I asked for mentorship and friendship from my colleagues across the aisle to help me improve my legislation. I worked hard and tirelessly for the people in my district during the pandemic, protecting those who needed protecting the most, which included the manufacturing workers who weren't being protected at work during COVID. I will continue to work tirelessly to represent the voices of all of the people in the 25th district once I am elected state senator. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We'll go to Mara Hirschauer.
All right, thanks. You know, this is a really good question, and it's interesting to think about what makes me a unique leader, and the best governing bodies are rich and diverse in their experiences. And I have experiences all through early education to adult education. I understand empathetic listening. It's something we are lacking at the federal level right now, and compassion and empathy can go a long way to furthering conversations and reaching across the aisle. You know, I'm every single day out in our community listening to people's concerns, and I am talking to all voters. I am knocking on doors with flags from my opposite political party, and I'm not afraid to do that because it is important to me to know, you know, what our community needs, whether you're voting red or you're voting blue. When elected, I'm here to see the best for our community, and that means the best schools, access to jobs, helping our small businesses recover. So what makes me unique is really just my commitment to this district where I am rooted and raising my family and ready to learn and work hard for the people of the 49th district.
Thank you. Laura Curtis.
So I've been on my village board in North Aurora since 2011. And during that time, I've said that I would only run for 3 terms because I believe in term limits. I said I would fight for property tax reform. And I'm proud to say that we were able to freeze our taxes for the most recent 2-year period. And I'm also proud to say that our budget, our bond rating has been increased to a AA+, which is a notch below perfect. State of Illinois is a BBB-, a notch below junk. So I've got a proven track record of doing what I say I'm going to do, getting things done, and having a fiscally conservative bent, which I'd love to take down to Springfield. So if you're a voter and you believe in term limits and you believe in somebody who's going to do what they say they're going to do and believes in let's get the property taxes and the pensions done, I won't vote for the fair tax. I will not vote for Mike Madigan as speaker, who, by the way, has funded my my opponent's campaign at over $250,000. And I will fight corruption. And I would like my opponent, I'd like to call her out and ask her on her most recent mailing piece if she would name the name of who I am associating with, who is accused of repeatedly sexually molesting young girls. Because as a mother of a 20-year-old daughter who always has young girls in my home, I'd like to know who it is that I'm allegedly associating with that is molesting young girls. Thank you. And that's why you need to vote for me, because I'm sick of the corruption. I'm sick of the taxes. I've got a record and I will go to Springfield and I will work for the voters.
Laura, did you want to respond to that?
If we want to get into a back and forth about mailings, you know, I would like to know how.
Accusing me of associating with a sexual predator. I want to know who it is to protect my family. I want a name. That's all I'm asking for. If you're mailing it out, I need to know who I'm associating with that is a predator.
You are accusing me of being part of a cover-up that happened in 2012 that with a sexual assault, which centers around a real victim. We have Lane is a Republican donor who gives money to the Illinois Republican Party and also gave money to Roy Moore. There's a line, there's a thread there that we can connect. There is no thread connecting me to a sexual assault that happened in Champaign, and there have been mailers that have gone out about that too. I didn't bring that with me here today because I do not want to participate in this back and forth, but both sides are egregious right now. I would agree with you.
Okay, let's move on to Keith Wheeler.
Well, thank you. Thanks for hosting this today. I appreciate it. I think it's an important dialogue that we've had. I want to point to the fact that we all want to see Illinois improve. And we improve more when we work together than when we work apart. I've demonstrated in my 3 terms that I've had in Springfield that I can not only lead on important issues, I can work across the aisle to get results. I serve in a unique role as the Republican co-chair on the Joint Committee on Administrative Rules, which is, in my opinion, not only the most important, but the most powerful committee that exists right now in Springfield. It is still meeting year-round, every month. We just got back from Springfield on Tuesday. That is an opportunity to work across the aisle in a way that's very collaborative and earns the respect and trust of members of both sides of the aisle. I am the spokesman on 3 different committees, all substantive committees in the House, which I think is more than anybody else gets to do right now. And I appreciate that because I take on the workload, I work hard, I try to understand the issues. There's issues that I understand from my background in construction and in IT and as a small business owner, but there's also things I don't know enough about. And the folks at Markland were generous enough to me to give me an advocacy award this year because I didn't understand much about the very specific issues that the development disabled community deals with, but I've had to learn those through my role in JCAR and have been a staunch advocate for what they're trying to do and for the families that they support. So with that, I appreciate the opportunity to be here with all of you today, and I look forward to another term in Springfield working for everyone in the 50th District.
Thank you. And then Kate Monteleone.
Thank you. And thank you for hosting this forum this morning. It is a great service to the community, and I, with all the others, do appreciate it a great deal. I would like to say that I entered this race for the 50th District, which has been a long-standing, safe Republican district, to give voters a choice. Nothing speaks more clearly that someone's vote doesn't matter to me than an unopposed candidate. So that's why I entered the race. And I'm bringing to this role 6 years of prior experience as an elected library trustee and board chair, and 25 years leadership experience in healthcare and university settings. And I want to share with all of you that my campaign has not accepted any money or staff from Mike Madigan or the Democratic Party of Illinois. I will represent the priorities of the community, which are and including healthcare that is affordable and accessible through a public option plan, property tax relief for homeowners and businesses, investments in education and clean energy jobs. I have been endorsed for this in this campaign by the Fox Valley Building and Construction Trades, the Democratic Women of Kendall County, Planned Parenthood, and I am a Gun Sense designated candidate with Moms Demand Action. I am eager and excited to serve the people who live and work in the 50th District. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, everybody. That concludes today's interview. We want to thank the candidates for their time and their participation. Good luck on your campaigns. A reminder to our viewers that the election is November 3rd and early voting begins September 24th. That will include mail-in voting this year. We encourage all voters to research the candidates and issues in all the races and to make use of the Daily Herald and Shaw Media as part of that research. Ultimately, informed voting is one of the most sacred obligations a citizen has if a democracy is to flourish. Thank you for watching and stay well.
Thank you all.
Thank you.